So when you're taking these guys, let's assume for the example that you're on a camp with someone, you're getting them ready for a bout that's coming up in the future. Maybe you can just talk about what's the bird's eye view here of nutrient intake, regulating their profile so that they don't lose strength in the process of losing weight, how they get up to the very last point at which they can keep the weight until they have to lose it. What are some of these factors that you're assessing through that process so that they don't get robbed of their energy or their ability to recover or their ability to show up the next day and train?
Yeah, so I guess I'll break this into the phases that we take them through. So the very first phase is what I would call the fight camp phase, which is our chronic weight loss phase. So this is where these guys will be, like you said, eating in a slight deficit, but we're trying to maintain as much muscle mass as possible and as much energy and strength as possible. And the way that we do that is that we have to do a pretty thorough assessment on them first, and we have to check to make sure that they have no nutrient deficiencies or hormone profiles that aren't ideal. And we do that by, a routine blood test, what we call a complete blood count. We test their testosterone, their iron levels, their thyroid. There's no point doing any of this nutrient manipulation if they have other deficiencies in place. We've got to make sure that their body is good clean slate before we start. The next thing that we do is we do a body composition assessment where we assess the amount of lean mass or muscle mass that they have, and then the physical amount of fat that they have. And what that does is that helps us calculate how much fat we can physically take off them in the time frame that we have, so that we can keep their body from not being undernourished, but not going into too dangerously low levels of body fat either. And then once we have that information, we can cross reference our nutrient information. So the macronutrients that we want to feed them. So we'll work out how many calories they need to eat in order to stay in that deficit, but we'll also organize their macronutrients in a way that we call it periodization, where yes, we need them to have consistent protein intake, and we generally recommend about a 2 to 2.5 grams per kilo for our athletes to help support
Wow.
keeping that lean mass while they're in this deficit. And then we'll schedule about 0.5 grams to 1 gram per kilogram of fat. And then what we do is we periodize the remaining calories to carbohydrates. And the way we periodize that is we cross-reference with their training schedule. So if they've got high intensity training days or very intense sessions, will dedicate more carbohydrates to those days. And if they've got lower, more technical sessions or rest days, we'll decrease that, with the goal overall at the end of the week that they've got a calorie goal that we need to hit in a totality of those 7 days to achieve that weight loss. And I guess, to your point, we're trying to do this in a way that maximizes fat loss, but in a way that doesn't put them too deep in what we call acute low energy availability, which is essentially the more correct term to talk about calorie deficits. Energy availability is the concept that you have a certain amount of food, energy from food that you eat, and then you use that energy for bodily functions. You use it for exercise, for movement, for going, brushing your teeth, making coffee, all of those things. And
Right.
whatever number you have left over from that food after you've taken it away for your vital functions and your exercise and whatever, is the energy available to your body. And we know if that gets too low, we know a lot of negative things start happening to our body. Our digestion goes, our
Yep.
strength and power output goes down, our testosterone plummets, our risk of injury goes down. So we're trying to play this really fine balancing act of, we need to be in this low energy availability
Yeah.
to cause the body to give up body fat and to utilize stored body fat. But we also are getting this person to train 6, 7 days a week and do pretty intense sessions. So it's a really, really fine balancing act of, okay, how do we walk this line of, we need to put them in acute low energy availability, but we just want to put them in just the right amount so that we can use the calories we have to fuel them as best and get them through this camp.
So if you're taking this approach to it, none of this can be guesswork, I'm assuming. So are you running, like, at the beginning, let's say you're doing intake with an athlete, do you run active metabolic assessment, resting metabolic assessment, and then gauge based on you and your team's experience of being grapplers, actually striking, understanding relatively what a heart rate range is in a given round, and then how many rounds they're going to do in the day? Like, that just seems like, I mean, it doesn't seem, I know for a fact, that is an extremely hard thing to calculate. when you're working with the athlete. Then there's other things that are playing into that too, like their sleep, their recovery. Are they resting enough? What's their resting heart rate? What's like, how are you looking at that? Are you taking into account finite metrics like their metabolic assessment on both ends of these kind of things, and just kind of running this like almost a really really calculated dice roll as they get closer? Or is there more guesswork going into that?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. I think it's a common misconception in nutrition is that you can make these calculations. And as you said, you can't. The fact of the
Yep.
matter is in nutrition, we don't have the technology and we don't have the knowledge in science to say you need exactly this many calories and this many grams of carbohydrates. We do run metabolic assessments where you can do resting metabolic rate tests, but they're
Mhm.
not exactly accessible to everyone, and even our high level athletes can often struggle to get access to them. So yeah, in an ideal
Yeah.
world, we run an RMR test with everyone, we get everyone DEXA scanned, we can do all the maths, but
Yep.
in reality, that's not what's going to happen. And I think this is where experience really comes into it, right? Because we've done this with tens of thousands of athletes,
Yeah.
so we more often than not, we can look at someone's body scan and we can determine the ratio of body fat to lean muscle mass, and then we compare it to the data we have on hundreds of other athletes who have been in that position and have similar training outputs. And that's the benefit of working with just a singular type of sport. We understand what the nuances of combat sport training is like, what it requires for a wrestling session, how that's different to a Muay Thai session, how that's different to a technical grappling session, how that's different to live sparring, how live sparring is different to live fight simulation. So
Mhm.
we understand and we have all that data from all these other athletes. And when we look at this and we do our assessment and we get our numbers, we go, okay, well, how does this compare to all of these other athletes, and how confident are we that if we put person A on 1850 calories, that they will lose 1.5% of their body weight every week. And at the start, it's definitely difficult if you're getting into this area because you don't have that data to fall back on. We're very
For
fortunate,
sure.
like I said, that we've got tens of thousands of athletes in our data bank, so we can fall back on that. And lucky enough, fortunately for our clients, we get it right a lot more than we get it wrong. And we understand, like you said, the metrics to track to make sure
Mhm.
that we are getting this right. And, you can get as fancy as that as you want, but at the end of the day, if they're not losing the recommended amount of weight per week, you know that you have to decrease or increase their intake depending which way it's going. I think what's more important than getting really, really in depth and overthinking the numbers is having a very, very good system which can
Mhm.
allow that person to hit the goals that you set out. So setting this up in a way that, okay, I know this person has this much body fat. I know by the start of fight week we need to be this weight. That requires us to lose this many pounds or kilograms of fat. We can break that down
Yep.
into how much that is per week. Based on what that percentage is of their body weight, that can dictate what nutritional approach that we take. Do we have to fuel them optimally and give them as many carbohydrates and keep their fat quite high and their protein high? Is that allowable in the percent of body fat that we have to play with each week? Or are they really pushing the limit here where they're trying to lose 2 to 3% of their body weight each week, and we have to use other tactics where we're probably going to have to rip some muscle off when we do protein sparing approach where we bring down their protein, we bring down their fat all the way to the what we would consider the dangerously low but acceptable levels,
Mhm.
and then we reduce their carbohydrates. So it's all dependent on the person, but again, it comes back to having good systems in place that you can categorize these athletes into. And again, the benefit that we have is that we've done this with so many athletes that we can put them in this system and quite easily see where they fall. But again, we do have to monitor them. We have to make sure that they're being adherent. We have to make sure they're actually following the plan, which is a complete other conversation in itself.